Okay, so now that we have dependency injection and that we have a loose coupling, another benefit is that to do the unit testing is much easier. So this will be a little overview of unit testing, as well as kind of how easy it is to implement it with dependency injection and loose coupling. So these two things can make our testing process easier, obviously. The best way to unit test is while coding. We didn't do that for these examples, but that's okay. We're going to show you now. Unit testing is done on a method level. So first thing we need to determine is what we need to test. In this case, what we're going to be testing for the example is view model. So in order to test the view model, we have to isolate everything else. We are only testing, you know, the execution of our refresh command, which displays our people list, and also the clearing. So if we don't have this dependency injection, and if we're relying on all these other objects, it's very hard to only test this. But since we're really loosely coupled, all we have to do is mock up another repository that we create in memory using the mock, which is a mocking module. And I actually, when I was thinking about testing this, I thought that I would have to create a new repository just for the testing, and that would kind of be a lot of work because I have to create a different one for each of the unit tests. So this is where mocking really it's great, because we can just plug in a known mocked object, and we can't rely on, obviously when you're doing a unit test, we can't rely on underlying functions, because now if that's broken, we're not testing that, we're only testing our method that is supposed to get us the data. That's all we need to make sure this is working. Our naming is going to be done for our methods, or the testing method is going to be done with 3 parts, each with the underline, and that's recommended by Rowe Ashrow unit testing book. And misspell here, we'll build methods using our unit test methods using arrange, act, assert, and check. I mean arrange, act, and assert, which assert is the actual check. So to get started, I already created the directory here. Unit test will create another project, new project, and it's going to be unit test project, and the name of the project is going to be the name of this solution that we want to test. In this case is going to be the extent that we can see that we are testing people viewer presentation, so that will be the actual name of our unit test project. So we'll call it people viewer dot presentation, because we're testing the presentation, and we'll call it a test. People viewer presentation test. So that creates our people viewer presentation test project, and our first test that we are testing is going to be people viewer model test. So we can go ahead and rename this to people viewer view model test. So this is the name of our actual test, and we change it here too. And then, like I said in introduction here, we do the 3-part method name. So the first thing that we are testing obviously is our people. And then what we're trying to do here is we're testing on execute on, we're testing the on refresh command first, and then what we're trying to make sure is that once it's refreshed, that it's populated, something like this. So this is a good way to name our test method. So our test method is going to have obviously three things, like I said, and this is range, act, and assert. So to arrange, obviously we first have to get an instance of our people list, right? So we say var, and we can call it to view model, and we say new, and we have to go ahead and add a reference here to our, actually we need to add a reference to our presentation, to our interface, and to our shared objects. And then we say using people view that presentation here first, because we need to go ahead and new up our people viewer model, and we need to pass that interface to it, but we don't have interface right now to pass, so we'll just put a placeholder here. So the next step that we do is we say view model that refresh people command execute, and we send null parameter, and then we assert, so we actually do the check here to see if so we do assert first, that we check, we make sure it's not null, and then we assert, and then we say is equal are equal, and we say some number that we're going to have, that we're going to know in advance the number, and then that count, and this is in a link. So now we have a pretty decent test method here created. So the next thing that we need to do now is we need to get this interface here. So we can go ahead and start with just putting the field here, and we'll call it well, let's go ahead and bring our interface using statement here, saying our interface. underscore name of our interface is in our repositories iPerson repository, so I got it wrong here. So here we go. Now I have iPerson repository we create, which we pass here. But we have to, set this up with some value, right? And we do that in another method called setup. Just void. In our setup, first thing that we do is we hard code our people list. I can just drop it in here. So just a list with 2 persons in it. And it's asking for a person object, and there it is. And then we need to find a way to, also missing our generic collection. Now we need to find a way that we can work this thing into in-memory object that we can use to kind of mock this repository, the whole thing. And we use that using our mock. And I don't have it installed here yet, but in order to do that we just go to manage NuGet packages, browse, MOQ, Daniel Casolino, install. So now we have it installed. We can go ahead and add our using here for it. And then we say repo mock, because we are mocking the repository. And we say we get an instance of it, new mock. And we kind of tell it what type. We pass the class here. In our case, the class is actually interface. So this is how we get this instantiation of the repo mock, and then we do this setup. Repo mock that setup. And then this takes this link in which we basically act like we're calling the method on our interface, get people, and it returns people. So it returns this guy, but it creates that object. We're not just returning the list. Everything is functioning like it's supposed to be. I mean, we are not like cheating by somehow just passing the list here. We're really like putting this object through this repo. So it's actually calling the actual iPerson repository. It's working through the actual interface, putting this method, but it has a way of actually inserting. Instead of going somewhere to get the data, it's just inserting right here. We just provide it right here. We know what we are providing. And then we just assign this, or we set our field value to repo mock that object that comes back. And then we take a look down here, we know that we have two of these guys, and we know that count should be 2. Let's see if it builds. And let's do test, run, all tests. So we discovered our tests, and it actually failed our test. That's very interesting. And it failed it because, most likely because our setup method here has to have a special test initialize attribute. So now that we have this test initial attribute, let's try to run it again. And here we go, it actually passed. And we created a very simple and very easy test to test our onRefresh command. And I'll just go ahead and do the onClear command real quick. Okay, so I ran both of the tests and they both passed. And I just want to highlight here, as far as the testing on clear command, a little clever, nice little thing how it's been done is that in arrangement we actually are doing the mock-up of the to make sure that we are getting list of people first, because how do we know it's clearing it? Obviously, in order for something to get clear, it first has to exist. So our arrangement is actually doing what our test up here is doing. It's getting the list, it's making sure it works, otherwise it breaks with invalid arrangement. Then our act is doing the execute clear command, and it's making sure that there's 0 count in it. And this is a video on how cool and how easy it is to do unit testing after we discover the power of dependency injection and loose coupling.